Section 1. It was a truth universally acknowledged in certain rarefied circles of London society that an invitation to one of Lady Genevieve Marchmont's fortnightly salons was a mark of singular distinction. To mingle in the opulent chinoiserie-decorated drawing-room of her Mayfair mansion, to sip the impeccable champagne and to be seen by the right people was a social triumph. On the night of October the 23rd, however, triumph curdled into something altogether more sinister. The company, as always, was select. There was the guest of honor, the celebrated and controversial archaeologist, Professor Alistair Finch, bronzed and boisterous from his latest dig in Mesopotamia. There was the exquisite and melancholic widow, Mrs. Rosalind Keeling, whose quiet beauty seemed accentuated by an aura of perpetual sorrow. Present also was the brisk, no-nonsense figure of Dr. Jonathan Quayle, a Harley Street specialist with a keen eye and a sharper tongue. Completing the intimate circle was the dead woman's niece, the vivacious and modern Miss Felicity Marchmont, whose bobbed hair and bold opinions were a constant, if affectionate, thorn in her aunt's side. Overseeing it all with the quiet efficiency of a stage manager was the butler, Mr. Riggs. A man of such impeccable discretion, he seemed less a person than a well-tailored piece of furniture. The evening had proceeded with its usual rhythm, polite debate over canapes, the professor's somewhat lengthy anecdotes about desert tombs, a murmured exchange between the widow and the doctor that seemed to have a clinical undertone. Lady Genevieve, a striking woman in her late 50s with hair of spun silver and eyes of cool azure, held court from her favored wingback chair by the hearth. She was, as ever, impeccably composed, her smile a calibrated instrument of charm or dismissal. The singular event, the one everyone would later fixate upon, occurred just after 10 o'clock. The professor was holding forth on the curse of a particular pharaoh when Lady Genevieve, who had been listening with a faint, amused smile, suddenly gasped. Her hand flew to her throat. The color, so artfully maintained by powder and rouge, drained from her face, leaving it a mask of startled wax. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in a kind of profound, dawning astonishment. And then, most peculiarly, her lips curved. It was not a grimace of pain, it was a smile, a small, private, knowing smile, as if she had just been let in on a delightful and deeply ironic secret. She uttered a single, choked syllable, "You," before the delicate crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the parquet. She slumped back into the depth of the chair, her head lolling gracefully to one side, the strange, serene smile still etched upon her lifeless lips. The ensuing minutes were a tableau of chaos, frozen in the amber of shock. It was Dr. Quayle who first moved, his professional instincts overriding social. Paralysis. He felt for a pulse at her wrist and throat, his own face grim. He pronounced what was already dreadfully apparent. Lady Genevieve Marchmont was dead. Good God, a heart attack? Professor Finch boomed, his tanned face ashen. So it would seem, murmured Dr. Quayle, though his eyes, clinically assessing the scene, held a flicker of doubt. It was Miss Felicity who gave voice to the uncanny horror. "But did you see?" she whispered, her vivacity extinguished, her eyes fixed on her aunt's face. She was looking right at us, and she smiled. The local police, summoned by the stoic Riggs, were efficient but out of their depth. A heart attack was the obvious, convenient conclusion for a woman of her age and standing. The scene was orderly, there was no sign of a struggle. Yet the peculiarity of that final smile, the cryptic pronouncement, gnawed at the edges of the simple explanation, and there was one other, small, discordant note. As the body was being discreetly prepared for removal, Riggs approached the inspector. His voice, a dry rustle of paper, was barely audible. "A minor matter, sir, but the Artemisia, it is missing." The Artemisia was Lady Marchmont's most prized possession, a breathtaking Art Deco hair comb, a cascade of platinum leaves set with a single, peerless cabochon emerald at its center, reputedly a gift from a remorseful and royal former suitor. She had worn it that evening, a splash of vivid green in her silver coiffure. It was now gone. This changed everything. Theft implied an agent implied opportunity, and opportunity in that closed room was limited to a very few. Superintendent Arthur Holloway of Scotland Yard, a solid, dogged man, arrived the next morning. The combination of a high-profile death and a spectacular theft demanded higher scrutiny. He examined the statements, all identical in their shock, all subtly divergent in their details. He pondered the missing jewel. He stared at the photograph of the dead woman's strangely smiling face, and a profound unease settled in his stomach. This was not a simple case of theft coinciding with a natural death. The smile was a message, and the missing comb was a signature. But of what? Of whom? It was then that an idea, born of professional humility and remembered success, struck him. He recalled a fastidious little Belgian with an egg-shaped head and an unparalleled reputation for solving the puzzles people presented to one another. He needed someone who understood the psychology of a smile, who could dissect a glance, who could unravel the knot of human motives with the precision of a watchmaker. He needed, in short, the order that only one man could impose upon this deeply disordered scene. Reaching for his telephone, Superintendent Holloway muttered to himself, "This has little grey cells written all over it." He placed a call to Whitehaven Mansions. Section 2. Whitehaven Mansions was an oasis of geometric order in the chaotic heart of London. In his immaculate apartment, Hercule Poirot received the superintendent's summons with a fastidious nod. The facts, as relayed over the wire, were intriguing. A death, a smile, a theft, a tableau. Poirot's curiosity, that most delicate of instruments, was engaged. He dispatched a note of acceptance and spent the hour before his departure engaged in the vital task of ensuring the symmetrical alignment of his patent leather shoes upon their designated tree. He arrived at the Marchmont house in a taxi, pausing on the pavement to observe the edifice. It spoke of quiet, established wealth, of taste that was conventional but flawless. The door was opened not by the butler, Riggs, but by a young, red-eyed parlour-maid. The household, Poirot noted, was already adrift from its moorings. Superintendent Holloway awaited him in the drawing-room, now a chamber of suspended animation. The chair by the hearth stood empty, a silent accuser. The fragments of crystal had been swept away, but a faint, ghostly outline of their dispersal remained in the mind's eye. "Poirot, good of you to come," Holloway greeted him, his relief palpable. "A queer business. On the surface, straightforward. Beneath—" He shrugged his broad shoulders. "The surface, mon ami, is for the swimming pool," Poirot replied, removing his overcoat with a precise flick and handing it to the hovering maid. "The truth prefers the depths. Show me, if you please, the precise geography of the tragedy." Holloway guided him through the events. Poirot's eyes, bright as a bird's, darted about the room. He demanded to know where each person had been standing. He examined the wing-back chair, its brocade unfathomable. He peered at the space on the parquet where the glass had fallen, as if the pattern of its shattering could spell a name. "And the comb, the Artemisia, it was worn here?" Poirot asked, touching his own impeccably groomed hair above the temple. "So everyone says. Vanished into thin air, not in the room, not on the body, not in her private apartments." "Eh bien." Poirot steepled his fingers. "Then we must converse with the dramatis personae. They are gathered." "In the library. A tense bunch, I can tell you." "Excellent. The pressure, it often produces the tiny crack through which the light of truth may shine. But first, the anchor of the household. The butler, Riggs. Mr. Riggs materialized with the quiet inevitability of a shadow at noon. He was a man in his 60s with a face that seemed to have been carved from seasoned oak, its lines suggesting service, not expression. "You have served Lady Marchmont long, Monsieur Riggs." 27 years, sir." "Your impressions of last evening, the mood, the atmosphere, before the climax." Riggs's delivery was as dry and factual as an inventory. Her ladyship was in excellent spirits. She was particularly looking forward to Professor Finch's company. She found his adventures diverting. There was a slight tension, perhaps, between Mrs. Keeling and Dr. Quayle, a murmured conversation by the mantelpiece. I did not catch the content. "And the Artemisia comb. You saw it upon her ladyship when she descended." "I did, sir. As she passed me in the hall, the light from the chandelier caught the emerald. It was quite distinctive." "After the incident, who approached the body?" "Dr. Quayle immediately. Then Miss Felicity. Professor Finch remained by the drinks cabinet, seemingly stunned. Mrs. Keeling sank onto the settee, very pale. I, of course, went to telephone for the police." "And no one else neared the chair before the authorities came?" "No, sir. We all kept our distance, as if—" He paused, searching for the correct word. "As if it had become sacred ground." Poirot dismissed him with a nod. The man was a perfect witness, which in itself was suspect. To be so perfectly composed was a performance. Next came the niece, Miss Felicity Marchmont. She entered with a forced energy, her modern, straight-cut dress a declaration of war against the room's traditional opulence. Her grief was raw and genuine, but it was intertwined with a thread of anger. "It's monstrous, Monsieur Poirot. Someone killed her and stole from her in her own home. You are convinced it was murder, mademoiselle?" That smile. Aunt Genevieve didn't smile like that without a reason. It was her "I know something you don't know" smile. She was triumphant, even as she was dying, and the comb. Why would a thief wait for her to drop dead? Why not just knock her on the head? The logic was brutal but sound. "You inherit, I presume?" The question, blunt as a slap, made her flinch, then stiffen. "Yes, the bulk of the estate. She was my only family. We argued about my life, my choices, her stuffy old friends, but we loved each other. I didn't need to kill her for money, Monsieur Poirot. I could have waited. She wasn't immortal." "And the others that night? Your aunt's stuffy old friends?" Felicity's lips tightened. The professor fawned over her. "He's always after funding for his dusty holes in the ground. Rosalind Keeling is a professional mourner. Aunt Genevieve felt sorry for her, but I think she was a drain. And Dr. Quayle, he was her doctor, had been for years. A little too attentive, if you ask me." Poirot filed this away. "Thank you, mademoiselle. My sympathies for your loss." Professor Alistair Finch was a study in contrasted states. His frame was large, his voice designed to carry across desert plains, but his eyes, now stripped of their jovial bravado, were small and frightened. He spoke of Lady Genevieve as a great patroness, a woman of intellect and vision. "A terrible, terrible loss to the world of archaeology," he rumbled. "She understood the passion for the past, and supported this passion financially?" Poirot inquired gently. Finch's neck reddened above his starched collar. "She was a generous benefactor. My current expedition? She was considering a significant contribution, a very significant contribution. Now, of course," he spread his large hands in a gesture of despair, "but you cannot think, good Lord, man, I was fond of her." "The smile, Professor. Did you see it?" The professor looked genuinely bewildered. "A trick of the nerves, surely. A rictus." The poor woman's face contorted in her final moment. But Poirot, who had studied the police photograph, knew it was no rictus. It was a conscious, directed expression. Mrs. Rosalind Keeling drifted into the room like a wisp of grey chiffon. She was perhaps 40, with the fragile beauty of fine porcelain etched with lines of sorrow. Her voice was a soft murmur. "She was so kind to me. After my husband passed, she was a rock." "You were close confidants?" "As close as one could be to Genevieve. She had compartments. One was allowed into some, never into all." Mrs. Keeling's hands, clasped in her lap, twisted a delicate handkerchief. That night, she seemed preoccupied. Not unwell, just watchful. "And your conversation with Dr. Quayle by the mantelpiece. It seemed, how shall I say, intense." A faint flush tinged her pale cheeks. "It was a private matter, a medical consultation. He is also my physician." "I see. And the Artemisia comb. Did you admire it?" For the first time her eyes met Poirot's directly, and he saw not grief, but a flash of something harder, almost avaricious. "Everyone admired it. It was legendary. It suited her. Power suits some women." Then the flash was gone, replaced by the familiar mist of melancholy. Finally, Dr. Jonathan Quayle entered. He was a man of precision, his movements economical, his gaze assessing. He did not wait for Poirot's questions. "I can save you time, Monsieur Poirot. I examined Lady Marchmont. There were no overt signs of violence, no puncture marks, no signs of strangulation. Given the sudden onset and rapid demise, a catastrophic cardiac event is the logical conclusion. The smile, a muscular spasm, the missing comb, a servant's opportunism, likely the maid. The rest is hysterical fancy." "You are very definite, Docteur. Medicine is a science of facts." "And yet," Poirot said softly, "the human heart is not merely a pump. It is susceptible to shocks of a different nature. A sudden revelation, a terrible surprise. Could such a thing not cause the organ to fail?" Quayle's clinical mask slipped for a microsecond. A tick flickered near his left eye. "Psychosomatic effects are possible, but unprovable. Your conversation with Mrs. Keeling, a medical consultation in a drawing room, was that not irregular?" "Mrs. Keeling is a nervous patient. She sought reassurance about a minor. Prescription? It was a triviality." His tone dismissed it. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have patients who are still alive to attend to." Alone again with Holloway, Poirot paced the room, his steps neat and measured. "So, we have our closed circle, the air brimming with passion and motive. The archaeologist, desperate for funds. The melancholic widow, perhaps less sorrowful than she appears. The logical doctor, a little too logical. And the impeccable butler, who sees all and says only what is proper." "One of them's lying through their teeth," Holloway grunted. "Mais non, Superintendent," Poirot corrected, his eyes gleaming. "They are all lying. Each one has a secret they guard, a truth they bend. The question is not who is lying, but which lie contains the shape of the murder within it. For murder it was." Of that, Hercule Poirot is now convinced. That smile was not a goodbye. It was an accusation. Section 3, the library of the Marchmont house, had become a de facto holding cell for the uneasy and the aggrieved. Having gleaned what he could from the initial formal interviews, Poirot knew the time for individual performances was over. The next act required an ensemble. He instructed Superintendent Holloway to reassemble the party in the drawing room, the scene of the crime. The psychological advantage, Poirot believed, was essential. He took a moment to prepare himself, standing before a hall mirror to adjust the already perfect symmetry of his tie. His reflection showed a man of meticulous intent, a general about to deploy his most subtle weapons, observation and disquiet. He entered the drawing room not with a flourish, but with a quiet, deliberate presence that immediately siphoned the air from the space. The 5 suspects were arranged like uneasy sculptures. Miss Felicity perched on the edge of a Heppel-white chair, her posture defiant. Professor Finch stood by the window, staring out as if hoping to see a rescue party from the British Museum. Mrs. Keeling had retreated into the shelter of a deep armchair, a silhouette of grey. Dr. Quayle stood with clinical detachment near the cold fireplace, and Riggs was a silent sentinel by the door. "Thank you for your patience," Poirot began, his voice polite yet carrying. "I am Hercule Poirot. You may have heard of me." He paused, allowing the weight of his reputation to settle. It produced varied effects, a flicker of hope in Felicity's eyes, a tightening of Quayle's jaw, a blankness on Riggs's face. "I have been asked to cast a little light on the sad events of last night. To bring order, you understand, where there is currently only confusion." He began to pace a slow, small circle, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us first establish what we know. Lady Genevieve Marchmont died suddenly in this room before witnesses. An object of great value disappeared from her person at the moment of, or shortly after, her death. The police have considered a tragic coincidence, a heart attack and a theft. I, however, do not believe in coincidences of such theatrical convenience. Nature is rarely so obliging to the criminal mind." Dr. Quayle cleared his throat. "With respect, Monsieur Poirot, you are not a medical man. The symptoms are consistent with several possibilities." Poirot interrupted smoothly, without looking at him. "I'm a student of the human symptom, Doctor. The most compelling symptom last night was not clinical, but psychological. The smile." He stopped pacing and turned to face them all. "Each of you saw it, a smile of recognition, of perhaps irony. A woman does not smile so at a failure of her own myocardium. She smiles so at a person, at a revelation." A heavy silence descended. Poirot let it stretch, observing the pressure build in each of them. "Now," he continued, his tone becoming brisk, businesslike, "we have a closed circle. The comb did not walk away on its own. Therefore, it was taken by one of you in this room. That is a fact. The question of murder is, for the moment, a separate hypothesis. But if we find the thief, we may find our answer to both." He approached Felicity first. "Mademoiselle, you were distraught. You rushed to your aunt's side. In such a moment of shock, of grief, would you have noticed if the comb was still in her hair?" Felicity shook her head, her eyes brimming. "No, I only saw her face. That awful, knowing smile. I didn't look at her hair." "Of course not. A natural reaction." He moved to Professor Finch. "Professor, you remained by the drinks cabinet. You had a clear view, n'est-ce pas? Did you see the comb?" Finch mopped his brow with a large handkerchief. I cannot say for certain. My eyes were fixed on Genevieve's face, just like the others. It was a ghastly sight. The emerald was green, her hair was silver. From that distance, it might have blended. I simply didn't register it. A curious blindness for a man whose profession is the observation of small, significant details in the earth," Poirot mused, not unkindly. He turned to Mrs. Keeling. "Madame," she gave a start, as if roused from a dream. I was not looking at her head at all. I was watching her hands. When the glass fell, it was so sudden. And you, Docteur, you were the first to reach her. You felt for a pulse. Your eyes, they were inches from the Artemisia comb. Did you see it?" Quayle's expression was one of strained patience. "My focus, as a physician, was on signs of life. The pupils, the lips, the carotid artery. A piece of jewelry, however valuable, was irrelevant to my diagnostic process. I did not note its presence or absence." "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured. "So, we have 5 people, a niece, a friend, a protégé, a doctor, a servant. All had the opportunity to take the comb in the confusion following the death. All claim in various ways not to have seen it. One of you," he said, his gaze sweeping over them, "is lying, and the lie is the first thread we must pull." He shifted his attention to Riggs. "You, Monsieur Riggs, did not approach the body. You had the most panoramic view. From your position by the door after the event, can you say who was closest to Lady Marchmont's chair for the longest period?" All eyes turned to the butler. His face remained impassive. Dr. Quayle was bent over her for approximately 45 seconds. Miss Felicity was at her side, kneeling for perhaps 2 minutes. The others remained at a distance. I myself left a telephone after ascertaining that the doctor was in attendance. "So," Poirot said, turning back to Quayle and Felicity, "the two people with the most intimate, prolonged access to the body both swear they did not see the missing object. It is a puzzle, is it not?" He did not wait for an answer. "Superintendent Holloway's men have searched the house, the rooms of the staff, the guests' personal effects. The comb has not been found. Therefore, it was either removed from the premises last night or it is hidden here with great cunning." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "It will be found. Of that you may be assured. Hercule Poirot has never yet been baffled by a hiding place." He saw it then, the faintest flicker. Not a gasp, not a start, just a minute tightening, a subconscious reaction to a perceived challenge. It did not come from Felicity or Quayle, but from a corner of the room he had not been directly addressing. He filed the observation away, a precious datum. "For now," Poirot concluded, his tone lighter, almost conversational, "I wish to understand Lady Genevieve. To solve her death, I must comprehend her life, her relationships, her secrets." He looked at each suspect in turn. "You all knew facets of her. In the coming hours, I will speak with you again, individually. We will talk not only of last night, but of weeks, months, years past. Nothing is irrelevant. The truth is a tapestry, and we have only seen the tangled back. We must turn it over to see the picture." He gave a small, precise bow. "You may retire to your rooms or go about your business within the house. The police, of course, will remain. I thank you for your cooperation." The group dispersed, a loose knot unraveling under tension. Holloway moved to Poirot's side. "Well, any clearer?" "It becomes both clearer and more obscure, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes on the retreating back of Mrs. Rosalind Keeling as she floated from the room. "We have established the lie about the comb. They all had motive and opportunity to take it. But only one had a motive to make her smile at the moment of death. That is the mind we must now seek. And that mind," he added, almost to himself, "is very, very clever. It believes it has committed the perfect crime, a murder without a weapon, a theft without a witness. It has overlooked only one thing." "What's that?" Holloway asked. Poirot's lips curved into a thin, knowing line. "It has overlooked the psychology of the smile. A smile is a signature. And every signature," he said, tapping his temple with a neatly manicured finger, "can be traced back to the hand that wrote it." Section 4. Poirot believed in the sanctity of environment. To understand a person, one must see them in their natural habitat, surrounded by the artifacts of their character. He began his deeper inquisition not in the formal drawing room, but by requesting private audiences in the spaces each suspect currently occupied within the great house. His first summons was for Mr. Riggs. Poirot elected to meet him in the butler's pantry, a domain of monastic order. Every silver polishing cloth was folded, every bottle in the wine rack aligned by label and vintage. It was, Poirot reflected, a mirror of his own soul. "You keep a remarkable order, Monsieur Riggs," Poirot began, seating himself on a utilitarian stool. "Order is the foundation of service, sir." "Indeed. And did your mistress appreciate this order?" "She demanded it, sir, in all things." Riggs stood at a respectful attention, his hands clasped behind his back. "In her personal affairs as well? Were they orderly?" A faint hesitation, almost imperceptible. "Her ladyship's private life was her own. My purview was the household." "But you saw the visitors. You heard the conversations in the drawing-room after dinner. You are, if you will forgive the analogy, the fixed point in the turning world of this house. Tell me of the relationships. Professor Finch, for instance. Was he a frequent supplicant?" Riggs chose his words with the care of a jeweler selecting stones. The professor's visits increased in frequency over the past 6 months. His conversations with her ladyship often concluded in the library with the checkbook. And Mrs. Keeling, a regular companion, her ladyship provided solace, and if I may say, a sense of purpose for Mrs. Keeling. Purpose? To be needed, sir. Her ladyship had a way of making people feel indispensable, even when they were not. It was the closest Riggs had come to an insightful and faintly critical remark. Dr. Quayle? He attended her medically once a month and dined perhaps every other week. A trusted confidant, I believe. And Miss Felicity, the arguments. A flicker of something, paternal frustration, crossed the butler's impassive face. They were storms that cleared the air. Underneath, the affection was deep. Miss Felicity is impulsive. Her ladyship was a break, a necessary one. Poirot leaned forward. Last night you told me you saw the comb as she descended. Describe its placement precisely. Riggs's eyes went distant, recalling the image. It was thrust into the chignon at the awl. Back of her head, sir, the platinum stem was visible, with the emerald leaf resting just above her left ear. It was not merely decorative. It was structural. To remove it quickly would have disturbed the entire arrangement. Poirot's eyes lit up. Ah, this is most significant. You are certain? To remove it would have been a noticeable act. To remove it neatly, sir, would have required 2 hands and several seconds. To snatch it would have pulled hairs, loosened pins. It was not a clasp one could simply unfasten in an instant. Poirot dismissed him, his mind whirring. This changed the geometry of the theft. It was not a furtive pluck in a moment of chaos. It was a deliberate, careful act. He next sought out Mrs. Keeling in the morning room, where she sat pretending to read a novel. The sunlight revealed the fine lines of strain around her eyes, the translucent quality of her skin. Madame, you spoke of your husband. How long has he been gone? 3 years, Monsieur Poirot. It was a sudden collapse, his heart. She said it with a practiced weariness. And Dr. Quayle was his physician as well. Her delicate fingers tightened on the book. Yes, he did everything he could. And for you, he provides solace, in the form of medication, perhaps. She looked up, startled. How did you... It is only a mild sedative, for my nerves. The tragedy left them frayed. And Lady Marchmont paid for this treatment, Poirot guessed gently. The flush returned. She was generous. She understood that Jonathan, Dr. Quayle, was the best. She insisted. So you were dependent on her. For companionship, for financial support regarding your health. A powerful position for her to hold over you, n'est-ce pas? The porcelain facade cracked slightly, a flash of resentment quickly veiled. It was not over me. It was kindness. And what of the Artemisia comb? Did you ever admire it, specifically? Her gaze dropped to her lap. She wore it the first time I came to tea after Arthur died. She said it was to cheer me up. It seemed cruel somehow. All that vibrant green life when my world was grey. She looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp. But I did not take it. I have no use for such things. Poirot found Professor Finch in the library, ostentatiously studying a volume on Babylonian artifacts. He was a poor actor. His eyes were not reading. Professor, your expedition. How much was Lady Marchmont intending to contribute? Finch closed the book with a thud. £5,000. The final pledge was to be confirmed this week. Without it, the dig closes. The potential fines, priceless. A unique cylinder seal, all lost. A powerful motive for ensuring her continued goodwill, or for expediting the transfer of funds before she could change her mind, Poirot observed coolly. Tell me, did you ever discuss the Artemisia comb with her? Genevieve's bauble? Good Lord, no. I deal in history, not trinkets. Yet its value could fund many expeditions. Did you know she kept it not in a safe, but in her bedroom? A foolish, almost provocative act. Finch's eyes bulged slightly. Did she? I never knew that. But his gaze shifted to the door as if calculating. Dr. Quayle was the hardest to pin down, agreeing to speak only in the hallway, as if to emphasize his transience. I have a full schedule, Monsieur Poirot. Make it quick. The medication you prescribed for Mrs. Keeling and for Lady Marchmont, were they similar? Quayle's professional armor sealed shut. I cannot discuss patient specifics. Doctor-patient confidentiality is absolute. Even when the patient is dead, especially then. What of your financial relationship with Lady Marchmont? Were your services generously compensated? I'm a leading specialist. My fees are a matter of public record. She paid them promptly. And there were no other financial ties? No investments, no loans? None. The answer was too swift, too flat. You were, by your own account, inches from the Artemisia comb. Monsieur Riggs has informed me it was not a simple piece to remove. Would you, as a man of science, agree that its careful extraction would have been difficult in the emotional atmosphere you described? For the first time, Quayle looked genuinely nonplussed. He had not considered the mechanics. I suppose. As I said, I wasn't looking at it. Finally, Poirot climbed to the top of the house to Felicity's modernized studio apartment, a riot of color and scattered sketches that was the antithesis of Riggs's pantry. Mademoiselle, your aunt's will. Aside from the estate, were there specific bequests? Felicity lit a cigarette with a defiant jerk. Small legacies for Riggs and the housekeeper. A piece of jewelry for Rosalind. Not the Artemisia, thank God. Some hideous cameo, and £1,000 for the professor's worthy work. The rest, the house, the investments, the Artemisia, come to me. And you knew the terms? She told me. She said it was to motivate me to marry well and stop dabbling in art. She blew out a stream of smoke. I told her I'd rather burn the money. A passionate statement. Did you argue about it that night? We argued about everything that night. She thought my new scarf was vulgar. Felicity's voice caught. The last thing I said to her was that she had the aesthetic sensibility of a tomb, and then she went and died looking like a blessed Egyptian queen smiling at her sarcophagus. She stubbed the cigarette out violently, tears finally spilling over. Poirot handed her his own immaculate handkerchief. The comb, mademoiselle. If you had taken it, where would you hide it? Here, in your studio? She looked at him, shocked, then laughed wetly. In this mess? You'd never find it. But I didn't take it. If I wanted it, I'd have just asked. She'd have probably given it to me, just to prove she could. Descending the stairs, Poirot assembled the fragments. The dependent widow, secretly resentful. The desperate academic, seeing history slip away. The controlled doctor, hiding behind a wall of confidentiality. The passionate heir, tangled in love and anger. The perfect butler, seeing all and saying nothing. And the comb. A theft that required care, not panic. A theft that therefore likely happened after the initial shock had subsided, when the body was alone for a moment, or when someone had the presence of mind to act with precision. That pointed away from Felicity, lost in grief and towards a cooler, more calculating mind. He found Superintendent Holloway in the study, reviewing statements. Well, Poirot, any cracks? Many cracks, Poirot said, settling into a chair. But they do not yet form a picture. We have a new fact. The comb was difficult to remove. Its theft was a deliberate, separate act, not a mere snatch of opportunity. This means our thief had either a moment of private access or the supreme coolness to perform the act under the gaze of others. So, the doctor or the butler, they seem the coolest heads. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone we are underestimating. Poirot's eyes grew distant. We must look not only at who took the comb, but why it was taken at that exact moment. Was it the motive for the murder? Or was it a diversion, a red herring to make us look for a thief when we should be looking for a killer. He sighed. There is a dissonance. The smile speaks of a personal, profound revelation. The theft speaks of greed, of opportunism. They do not harmonize. Unless what? Unless, said Hercule Poirot, they were performed by two different people. Section 5. The dissonance Poirot perceived between the intimate accusation of the smile and the crude opportunism of the theft gnawed at him. He spent the afternoon in a state of intense meditation, pacing the patterned rug of the library, aligning and realigning a set of porcelain figurines on the mantelpiece as if they were the suspects themselves. Order, he believed, would reveal the hidden pattern. It was the following morning when the break, or what appeared to be a break, came. A young constable, conducting a second, more thorough search of the servants' quarters under Holloway's renewed orders, made a discovery. Thrust deep behind a loose skirting board in the linen closet, wrapped in a dust-covered polishing cloth, was the Artemisia comb. Its discovery sent a shock-wave through the house. The emerald glinted with a cold green fire in the superintendent's broad hand, a stark indictment. The linen closet, Holloway said to Poirot, his voice low with triumph. That's Riggs's domain. He oversees all the household linens. Who else would have such easy, unremarked access? Poirot took the comb, holding it delicately by its platinum stem. It was exquisite, a masterpiece of the jeweler's art. He did not look triumphant. He looked thoughtful. It was hidden, yes, but was it hidden well? A loose skirting board in a commonly used closet. It is not the cache of a master criminal, mon ami. It is the panicked stash of an amateur. An amateur like a butler who's never stolen before. He sees his chance, takes the comb in the confusion and shoves it into the first hiding place he can think of. Later, with the house crawling with police, he can't retrieve it. The logic was seductive. They summoned Riggs to the study. The butler's face, upon seeing the comb on the desk, lost its seasoned oak complexion, turning ashen. But he did not crumble. He stood rigid. "Explain that, Riggs," Holloway demanded, pointing. "I cannot, sir." "Were you in the linen closet yesterday after the police search?" "I was in and out of it throughout the day, sir, as is my duty, fetching fresh table napkins, pillowcases for the guest rooms. Convenient. And you knew about the loose board?" "A household of this age has many minor defects, sir. I'm aware of most of them." His answers were impeccable, devoid of panic, which to Holloway seemed only more damning. "Your phlegm won't save you, man. You had the best opportunity. You knew the house. You're the only one who could have slipped away to hide it without being noticed. You took it, and when you saw Poirot here was getting close, you decided to pretend you knew nothing. But you got rattled when he talked about finding hiding places." Poirot, silent until now, watched Riggs. He saw the tremor in the old man's hands, not of guilt, but of a profound, wounded dignity. "Monsieur Riggs," he said quietly, "for 27 years, you have served with order. Why, on the night your mistress died, would you commit a disorderly act? To risk everything for a jewel you could never sell?" For a fleeting second, the butler's eyes met Poirot's. They held a world of complex emotion, loyalty, shame, and something else. A desperate, silent plea. "I did not take it, sir," was all he said, his voice a dry whisper. Holloway was unmoved. "Take him down to the station for further questioning," he instructed a sergeant. "We'll see what he has to say under proper lights." As Riggs was led away, his back straight, a perfect servant to the last, Poirot felt a deep unease. It was too neat. The discovery felt staged, like a piece of evidence placed for the police to find. He sought out Felicity. She was in the drawing room, staring at the empty chair. "They've arrested Riggs," she said, her voice hollow. "I don't believe it. He loved her, in his way. He'd no more steal from her than cut off his own hand." "Your aunt trusted him implicitly?" with everything. He was the only one who knew all her little habits, her preferences. He was like the clockwork of the house. You don't suspect the clock of theft? Poirot nodded. Precisely, mademoiselle, and a clock does not suddenly run backwards. He found Mrs. Keeling next, weeping softly on a settee. Oh, the poor man, the shame of it, but I suppose it must be true. The police found it. What other explanation is there? Perhaps, madame, the explanation that someone wished the police to find it there, Poirot suggested. She looked up, her tear-filled eyes wide with confusion. But who would do such a wicked thing? That, said Poirot, is the question. Professor Finch was heartier, though his relief seemed tinged with a new anxiety. Well, there you are. Case closed. Poor Riggs. Temptation got the better of him. A tragedy all around, but at least it's settled. I must get back to my work. The funding, you understand. Your funding, Professor, is now dependent on Miss Marchmont, is it not? Poirot asked. The heartiness vanished. I suppose it is. But that's neither here nor there now, is it? Dr. Quayle's reaction was the most telling. He offered a thin, satisfied smile. A predictable outcome. The servant class, a lack of moral fiber, often exacerbated by proximity to unearned wealth. A simple, sordid end to a distressing affair. I trust this means we are all free to go? Not quite, Doctor, Poirot said. A theft has perhaps been solved, but a death remains unexplained. Quayle's smile froze. The death, as I have stated, was natural. The stress of the theft may have precipitated it. Riggs is therefore morally responsible. Legally and medically, the matter is concluded. Poirot did not argue. He returned to the study where Holloway was writing up his report with an air of finality. Well, Poirot? Satisfied? The comb is found. The thief is in custody. The death, as Dr. Quayle says, was likely stress-induced. We can wrap this up. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his back to the superintendent. He spoke to the empty chair that was not there. Let us review the facts as they now stand, my friend. Fact 1. Lady Marchmont dies with a smile of personal recognition. Fact 2. A valuable comb is stolen from her person. Fact 3. The comb is discovered hidden in a place accessible to and known by the butler. Conclusion. The butler is a thief whose act caused a fatal shock. He turned, his eyes blazing. It is logical, it is tidy, it is convenient, but it is wrong. Wrong. The evidence is too perfect. Consider, a thief in the terrible moment after his mistress drops dead has the presence of mind to carefully extract a difficult-to-remove comb from her hair under the gaze of 4 other people. He then conceals it upon his person. Later, with police in the house, he chooses to hide it not in his own locked quarters, not in the cellar, not in the garden, but in a communal linen closet behind a board he knows the staff are aware of. Non. It is absurd. A man of Riggs's methodical mind would either have secreted it in a truly secure place or, if panicked, would have dropped it somewhere to be found, to distance himself from it. This hiding place incriminates him directly and solely. It is the act of a stupid man, and Riggs is not stupid. Or, Poirot leaned forward, it is the act of a very clever person who wishes us to believe the thief is stupid. Holloway put down his pen, his certainty wavering. You think someone planted it on him. I think someone used him. The theft and the murder are still 2 separate things. We have perhaps found our thief, or the person meant to appear as the thief. But we have not yet even begun to look for our murderer. He picked up the Artemisia comb from the desk, turning it in the light. This was a piece of theater, a distraction. The real crime, the one that made her smile, is still here, in this house, wearing a mask of innocence. And now, with Riggs conveniently removed, the murderer believes he, or she, is safe. He placed the comb back on the desk with a definitive click. The investigation, Superintendent, is not over. It has only just begun. Section 6. With Riggs in custody, a false calm settled over the Marchmont house. It was the quiet of a battlefield after a premature ceasefire. Poirot knew this peace was deceptive, a cover under which the true criminal would now feel emboldened, perhaps even triumphant. It was time to stir the waters. He began with subtle surgical provocations, delivered in private conversations that were anything but casual. To Professor Finch, he mused aloud in the library, it is a curious thing, the value of objects. To an archaeologist, a broken potsherd with historical provenance is priceless. To a thief, a flawless emerald is priceless. But to a murderer, what is the price of a secret? Often, it is far higher than either. I wonder, Professor, what secret your patroness might have uncovered in her own digging. Not in Mesopotamia, but in the lives of those around her. Finch, who had been buoyant since Riggs's arrest, fumbled a large tome on Etruscan art. Secrets. Genevieve wasn't a gossip. She was discreet. Discretion is a fortress, Poirot replied, polishing a silver paper knife with his sleeve. But even fortresses have a single, weak gate. The right key, the right pressure. Seat. It opens. He left the professor staring nervously at the bookshelves as if they might conceal listening ears. With Mrs. Keeling, he employed a different tactic. He found her arranging late-blooming chrysanthemums in the morning room, her movements listless. A sad duty, madame, to tend flowers in a house of death. They remind us of impermanence, do they not? Like beauty, like security. He sighed, a sound of profound weariness. Poor Monsieur Riggs. He maintains his silence. But it is a heavy burden to be accused of a crime one did not commit. The police, they can be persuasive. If he did not take the comb, then he must have seen who did. And if he saw, then he becomes not just a suspect, but a witness. A dangerous position. The slender shears in Mrs. Keeling's hand snipped through a stem with a sudden, sharp crack. A flower head tumbled to the table. A witness. But he said he saw nothing. Did he? Poirot's voice was a soft, insinuating breeze. Or has he, out of some misplaced loyalty, or perhaps fear, chosen not to speak? Fear is a powerful silencer, but guilt can be more powerful still. It makes people do reckless things to cover their tracks. He watched her pale throat work as she swallowed. You understand nervous dispositions, madame. Would you not say a person consumed by guilt might behave erratically? Might even, in a moment of panic, do something desperate? She did not answer, her eyes fixed on the fallen chrysanthemum. For Dr. Quayle, Poirot adopted a tone of brisk professional collaboration. He intercepted him in the hall as the doctor was retrieving his hat and coat. A moment of your expert opinion, doctor, now that the matter is almost settled. Hypothetically, if a person were to suffer a sudden cardiac arrest brought on by a profound psychological shock, say, the revelation of a devastating personal betrayal, would there be any residue? Any tiny physical sign that a mere coroner, looking for a blocked artery, might overlook? Quayle's face tightened. The heart stops. That is the residue, unless you are suggesting poison, which toxicology would have revealed. Ah, poison, a crude physical tool. I speak of a more elegant weapon, words. A single sentence, delivered with precision, can be as lethal as cyanide. You, with your knowledge of your patients' hearts, both physical and emotional, would be uniquely placed to craft such a sentence, would you not? To know exactly which truth would be the final, unbearable weight. The doctor's knuckles were white on his cane. That is not medicine, Poirot. That is fantasy and slander. Pardonnez-moi, Poirot said with a slight bow. It was merely a hypothesis. As you say, I'm not a medical man. He saved his most direct performance for Felicity. He found her in the conservatory, attacking a lump of clay with more violence than art. Mademoiselle, you are angry, not only at your loss, but at the injustice. You do not believe Riggs is guilty. Of course he isn't. Good. Then you will help me. We must think. If Riggs is innocent, then the comb was placed in the linen closet to frame him. Who would do that? Not a stranger. Someone in this house. Someone who knew his habits, knew about the loose board. Someone who needed a thief to distract from a murderer. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. You are modern. You understand psychology. The killer is here, watching us, believing they are safe. They will make a mistake. But we must hurry. For if they feel the net closing, they may try to silence the only other person who could expose them. Riggs, she breathed. Précisément. A witness in custody is still a witness, and a witness who is a convicted thief. His word carries little weight, but if he were to, say, retract a confession or make a statement, it could be troublesome. The killer might feel compelled to ensure his silence becomes permanent. He let the horrific implication hang in the humid air. Vigilance, mademoiselle. Watch everyone. Report to me anything, any small change, any odd behavior. The effect of these psychological probes was not immediate, but it was perceptible. The house's false calm began to fracture under the strain of hidden nerves. Professor Finch took to pacing the hallways, jumping at sudden sounds. He engaged Poirot twice on irrelevant topics, his conversation a nervous torrent, as if to prove his ease. Mrs. Keeling's melancholy deepened into a palpable anxiety. She took to lingering near windows, watching the street, and she abruptly cancelled her regular afternoon walk. Dr. Quayle, whose visits had become less frequent, suddenly reappeared at the house on a flimsy pretext of checking on Mrs. Keeling's nerves. He spent an inordinate amount of time in the drawing room, his eyes not on his patient, but on the door, the furnishings, as if mentally reviewing the scene of the crime. The tension reached its peak 2 evenings later. Poirot, having dined alone in the study, heard a commotion in the main hall. Raised voices, a sharp cry. He emerged to find Felicity Marchmont facing Dr. Quayle, her face flushed with fury. Mrs. Keeling hovered behind her, wringing her hands. "You had no right," Felicity was shouting. "Going through her private papers, she's not even cold." Quayle stood stiff, a small leather-bound ledger in his hand. "This is a medical log. As her physician, it is my property. It contains confidential notes. It has no bearing on anything." "Then why were you skulking in the library desk to get it?" Felicity shot back. "I was not skulking. I was retrieving what is mine." "Is it yours, doctor?" Poirot's voice, cool and clear, cut through the heat. "Or was it Lady Marchmont's? A medical log kept by a physician about a patient typically remains with the physician, n'est-ce pas? Why was this one here?" Quayle turned, his composure cracking. She sometimes requested to see it, to monitor her own condition. A foolish habit, but she insisted. "How convenient," Poirot said, stepping forward and plucking the ledger gently from Quayle's grip. "And how interesting that you felt the need to reclaim it tonight, after the arrest of Riggs, when questions about your late patient's health might be reconsidered." He opened the book, flipping through pages of neat clinical script. "Ah, I see. Blood pressure readings, prescriptions, and here, occasional notes. Patient anxious financial obligations. Patient concerned about dependency of R.K. He looked up. R.K., that would be Mrs. Rosalind Keeling, would it not? Her dependency? Mrs. Keeling gave a small gasp. Quayle's face was a mask of stone. "As I said, confidential." "A secret shared between doctor and patient," Poirot murmured, closing the book with a snap. "But now the patient is dead, and the doctor is very keen to keep this secret. Why, I wonder, unless the secret is not hers alone, but also yours." He did not wait for an answer. He handed the ledger back to Holloway, who had appeared at the sound of the altercation. "I think, Superintendent, we should have a specialist examine this. Not for medicine, for psychology, and for timing." That night, the house hummed with a new electric dread. The first false lead had collapsed. The psychological game had flushed the quarry into the open. Poirot, sitting in the dark of the study, knew the killer was now rattled, off balance. The careful facade was crumbling. The next move, he was certain, would not be one of concealment, but of action. And action, for the meticulous Hercule Poirot, always left a trail. Section 7. The night after the confrontation over the medical ledger was taut as a bowstring. Poirot, a self-proclaimed creature of routine, defied his own habits and remained in the Marchmont study long after midnight, a sentinel in the dim pool of light from a single green-shaded lamp. He was waiting. Disorder begets disorder. A rattled mind seeks to reassert control, often through drastic action. He did not wait in vain. Just after 2 a.m, a sound pierced the profound silence. Not a cry, but a heavy, reverberating thud, followed by the distinct musical shatter of glass. It came from the rear of the house, towards the servants' quarters and the garden doors. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, moving with a surprising swiftness that belied his fastidious appearance. He flung open the study door to see Superintendent Holloway, who had taken up residence in a guest room, stumbling into the hallway, revolver in hand. "Conservatory," Holloway grunted, and they hurried down the darkened passage. The door to the glass-walled conservatory stood ajar. Inside, the scene was one of surreal devastation. A large terracotta pot containing a prized orange tree lay on its side, soil and roots spilled across the tiled floor like a black wound. Nearby, a glass display case for orchids was smashed, its delicate contents crushed, and in the center of it all, half propped against a wrought iron bench, was the slender, gray-clad form of Mrs. Rosalind Keeling. A trickle of blood matted her silver fair hair above her temple. Her eyes were closed. Dr. Quayle, still fully dressed in a suit and tie, was kneeling beside her, his fingers on her wrist. He looked up as they entered, his face grim in the moonlight streaming through the glass roof. "She's alive. Pulse is steady. A nasty blow to the head, likely concussion." "Who did this?" Holloway demanded, scanning the shadowed corners of the plant-filled room. "I didn't see," Quayle said, his voice tight. "I heard the commotion from my room and came down. I found her like this." Poirot did not rush to the fallen woman. Instead, his eyes, adjusting to the gloom, performed a rapid inventory. The failed pot, the smashed case, the position of the body. He noted a scuff mark on the tiles, a fragment of gray wool caught on a sharp edge of the broken glass. He moved to the garden door. It was unlocked, but closed. Felicity and Professor Finch arrived then, wrapped in dressing gowns, their faces etched with shock in the lamplight Holloway had now switched on. "Rosalind!" Felicity cried, rushing forward before Poirot held up a restraining hand. "A moment, mademoiselle. The doctor attends her." His gaze swept over the 2 new arrivals. "You heard the noise?" "A god-awful crash," Finch said, his voice trembling. "I thought the house was falling down." "And you, Mademoiselle Felicity?" "I heard it too. I came straight down." Poirot nodded, his expression inscrutable. He turned his attention back to the scene. The violence seemed excessive for a simple assault. It was chaotic, angry. The pot was heavy. It would have taken significant strength to topple it. The display case was destruction for destruction's sake. Dr. Quayle looked up. "We need to get her to a proper bed. She should be monitored." "Of course," Poirot agreed. "But first, one must ask, what was Mrs. Keeling doing in the conservatory at 2 a.m? It was then that Felicity gasped and pointed. Clutched loosely in Rosalind Keeling's left hand, almost hidden by the folds of her dress, was an object that gleamed dully. It was a heavy, brass, cylindrical case, about 6 inches long, a horticultural sprayer used for misting delicate plants, But it was not for misting plants that it had been brought here tonight. Quayle gently pried it from her grasp and uncapped it. He sniffed cautiously, then recoiled, his professional detachment vanishing into disgust. Carbolic, he stated. A strong disinfectant, poisonous if ingested, caustic to the skin and eyes. A weapon, Holloway breathed. She was attacked because she had this. Or, Poirot said softly, she came here to retrieve it, or to use it. He looked at the injured woman, her fragile beauty now marred by blood and dirt. The plot, it thickens most satisfactorily. An assault, yes, but also, perhaps, an interruption. Under Poirot's direction, they carried Mrs. Keeling to her room, where Quayle dressed her wound and pronounced her stable but deeply unconscious. She may not come round for several hours, he said. That blow was meant to silence. Or to kill, Poirot added. He turned to Holloway. The conservatory must be sealed. Every fragment, every grain of soil, may speak. As dawn tinged the sky, the atmosphere in the house had transformed from dread to a state of siege. The attack made it clear. Riggs, in his cell, was no threat. The danger was here, among them. The killer had struck again. Poirot requested a private audience with Superintendent Holloway in the study. He had sent a constable to retrieve 2 specific items. The ledger and the comb, Poirot said, laying them on the desk. We have been thinking of them as pieces of 2 different puzzles. I believe they are pieces of the same one. How? A medical journal and a stolen jewel. Both are about control, Superintendent. The ledger recorded dependencies, weaknesses, secrets, the doctor's control over his patient's narratives. The comb represented wealth, beauty, social power, Lady Marchmont's control over her own image and, by extension, over those who admired or coveted it. He tapped the ledger. Dr. Quayle was desperate to get this back. Why? Not for mundane medical notes. I suspect for something specific, a particular entry. He opened the book, his finger tracing down the pages. He stopped at an entry dated 3 weeks prior. It read, Patient reports increased palpitations. Reluctant to discuss cause. Suspect anxiety related to financial pressures on cue. Prescribed mild sedative. Urged discretion. Financial pressures on cue, Holloway read. Q. Quayle. Precisement. Lady Marchmont was not just his patient. She was, I would wager, his creditor. The good doctor had financial pressures. He borrowed from a wealthy, demanding patient. A deeply unprofessional and compromising position. What if she threatened to call in the loan? Or worse, to expose his breach of ethics to the medical board? That would ruin him. Holloway's eyes widened. A motive. But what about the comb and the attack on Mrs. Keeling? Patience. The comb. It was taken, but not for its value. It was taken as proof. Proof that the death was a robbery gone wrong, a random act. But Riggs's testimony about its careful placement ruined that. The thief needed a fall guy. So the comb is found in Riggs's territory. A neat solution. But you said the thief and the killer might be different people. I am reconsidering. Perhaps they are the same, but the theft was an afterthought, a plan B that went awry. Or perhaps he picked up the Artemisia comb, its emerald cold. The comb was taken for a reason we have not yet seen. A personal, not a financial, reason. A trophy, a token, or a necessity. He put it down. Now Mrs. Keeling. She is dependent on the doctor for medication, paid for by Lady Marchmont. She is a link between them. What did she know? Or what did she do? She goes to the conservatory in the dead of night with a sprayer full of poison, to meet someone, to threaten, or to carry out an act of her own. The constable knocked and entered, handing Poirot a small evidence bag. Inside was the fragment of grey wool from the broken glass. Poirot held it up to the light. It was a fine, soft merino. He looked at Holloway. Mrs. Keeling was wearing a grey chiffon dressing gown. This is too thick. This is from a man's suit. A grey suit. Recognition dawned on Holloway's face. Finch. He was wearing a grey suit yesterday. And Quayle wears dark colours. And Riggs is in custody, Poirot finished. So, we have a new suspect. The professor, whose funding was in peril, who was caught skulking near the scene of the attack, whose clothing may bear a tear. And we have a gravely injured woman who may be a second victim, or a would-be perpetrator who was stopped. He rose, his movements decisive. The attack changes everything. It means the killer is not finished. The secrets in this house are like buried cylinders. Someone is trying to seal them shut forever. We must speak to Professor Finch, and we must be ready. For when Mrs. Keeling awakens, she will have a story to tell. And that story, he said, his eyes gleaming, will be the beginning of the end. Section 8. The grey dawn found the Marchmont house silent once more, but it was the silence of exhaustion, of nerves scraped raw. Poirot, however, was a dynamo of quiet energy. He had spent the hour before breakfast not in rest, but in a final, meticulous examination of the conservatory, now a cordoned-off crime scene within a crime scene. He moved with the precision of a surveyor, his eyes missing nothing. The toppled pot, the shattered glass, the scuff mark, the position of the bench. He photographed them in his mind, arranging and rearranging the elements. The fragment of wool had been sent for comparison with Professor Finch's suits, but Poirot's interest was now captured by something else, the horticultural sprayer. He had it brought to the study, sealed in an evidence bag. It was an old, solid piece, brass slightly tarnished. He did not open it. The pungent smell of carbolic still emanated faintly. His attention was fixed on its surface. He took out his signature monocle, polished it on a silk handkerchief, and screwed it into his eye. "What do you see, Poirot?" Holloway asked, weary from the night's events. "I see contradiction, mon ami," Poirot murmured, his face inches from the brass cylinder. "This object is from the gardening shed, n'est-ce pas? A place of damp soil, fertilizer, and tools. Yet look here." He pointed with a slender finger. On this curve, near the base, a series of tiny, faint scratches. Not deep gouges from being knocked against a pot. These are fine, parallel lines. And here, on the plunger handle, a smudge. He leaned closer. It is not grease from a gardener's hand. It has a slight luster, a residue. What kind of residue? That we shall ascertain. But note the psychology. A person wishing to poison, to blind, to disfigure. They choose a sprayer of carbolic acid. A brutal, painful weapon. But they do not wear gloves. They leave their fine scratches and their peculiar smudge. This was not a weapon taken in cold-blooded premeditation. It was an idea seized in a moment of desperation or fury. Or, he paused, his eyes narrowing. It was a prop. A prop. Oui. Perhaps Mrs. Keeling did not bring it to use. Perhaps she brought it to be seen with it, to create a narrative. He set the sprayer down carefully. But that is speculation. The scratches are fact. He turned his attention to the Artemisia comb, which lay beside the medical ledger on the desk. He picked it up again, not looking at the jewel, but at the stem, the fastening pin. He examined it with the same intensity he had given the sprayer. "You are looking for more scratches?" Holloway asked. "I am looking for truth, Superintendent, and truth is often found in the absence of something expected." He rotated the comb slowly. Monsieur Riggs said to remove it would require 2 hands and disturb the hair. Yet when it was found, was there any hair entwined in its clasp? Any silver strands caught in the mechanism? Holloway consulted a report. None noted. It was clean. Too clean. If it was ripped hastily from the head of a dying or dead woman, there would be hair. If it was carefully removed by the killer in that tense room, there might still be a strand or 2. But there is nothing. It was wiped, deliberately cleaned. He placed it down. Why does a thief, in panic, clean a stolen object before hiding it? He does not. But a person who wishes to remove evidence that the comb was not in her hair at the moment of death, that person would clean it very thoroughly. Holloway stared at him. You think the comb was taken before she died? I think, Poirot said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. We have been looking at the sequence all wrong. We assumed death, then theft. But what if it was theft, then death? Or, more precisely, what if theft caused death? He opened the medical ledger again, flipping not to the recent entries, but to the very beginning of Lady Marchmont's records with Dr. Quayle, some 8 years prior. He read in silence, his finger tracing the lines. Holloway watched, baffled. Here, Poirot said finally, tapping a short entry from 5 years ago. A minor incident. Patient distressed after losing sentimental brooch. Prescribed sedative. Note, patient has heightened anxiety reaction to loss of personal effects, especially gifts from late father. He looked up, his eyes bright. Her father gave her the Artemisia comb on her 21st birthday. It was her most treasured possession, not for its value, but for its sentiment. To lose it or have it stolen would not be a mere irritation. For Lady Genevieve Marchmont, according to her own doctor, it would be a profound psychological shock. The pieces began to click together in Holloway's mind with an almost audible sound. So someone took the comb, and she saw them do it? Or discovered it was gone? In that moment, in that room. Poirot rose and began his characteristic pacing. Picture it. The evening is winding down. Perhaps she reaches up, an idle touch to her hair, and finds it gone. Her hand flies to her throat. She looks around, her eyes sweeping the faces of the only people who could have done it. She sees the thief. And in that moment, she understands not just the theft, but the betrayal. The utter personal betrayal from someone she trusted. The shock is catastrophic. Her heart fails, and as she dies, she looks at the thief, and she smiles. Not in triumph, but in the most profound, bitter irony. You, she says. You, of all people. The theory hung in the air, elegant and chilling. But then, Holloway argued, grasping for a flaw, the thief still has the comb in the room with everyone watching. They'd be caught immediately. Would they? Poirot asked. If the theft occurred moments before her death, the shock and grief that followed would provide perfect cover. Who would be searching the guests for the comb while the lady of the house lay dead in her chair? The thief had only to keep their nerve and secret it away later, perhaps even after the police arrived, during the general confusion. The hiding in the linen closet was a secondary, staged act to frame Riggs and close the case. And the attack on Mrs. Keeling, the sprayer. That, I believe, is a separate strand, now violently tangled with the first. Mrs. Keeling knew something. Perhaps she saw the theft, or perhaps she knew the motive behind it. Her midnight rendezvous in the conservatory was to confront someone or to be silenced. The sprayer, that still puzzles me. The scratches. He returned to the desk and picked up the evidence bag containing the sprayer, his brow furrowed. Then his gaze fell upon the medical ledger next to it, lying open. He looked from the book's leather binding to the brass cylinder and back again. Slowly, a smile of pure, undiluted revelation spread across his face. It was the smile of a man who has just found the last piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle and seen the complete picture. Mon Dieu, he whispered. But of course, it is so simple, so psychologically perfect. What? What is it? Holloway demanded. Poirot's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of intense concentration. He held up a hand. Not yet, my friend. I must be certain. There is a question I must put to one person. A simple question about a mundane object. The answer will confirm everything. He picked up the sprayer again, his eyes on the fine parallel scratches near its base. These were not made in a shed. They were made in a study or a library, by the metal clasp of a leather-bound book, repeatedly being placed beside it or carried in the same hand. He looked pointedly at the medical ledger. Quayle? Holloway breathed. Perhaps. Or perhaps someone who had reason to handle the doctor's property. Poirot's mind was racing ahead, the final connections fusing, the residue on the handle. It may be from a particular lotion or a cream used for nervous hands. We shall have it analyzed. But the logic, Holloway, the logic is now clear. We have the motive for the murder. Not greed, but a desperate need to prevent ruin, compounded by a terrible misjudgment. We have the method, a theft designed to cause a fatal shock, using the victim's own psychological vulnerability as the weapon. A murder without a poison, without a weapon, without a touch. The most brilliant and the most cruel I have ever encountered. He placed the sprayer down with immense care, as if it were a holy relic. Now, we must let the world think the investigation is stalled. Let the killer believe the attack on Mrs. Keeling has succeeded in muddying the waters. Meanwhile, we will quietly check a few facts. The whereabouts of a certain item on the night of the murder, the precise nature of Dr. Quayle's financial pressures, and the contents of Mrs. Keeling's private correspondence. He turned to Holloway, his eyes alight with the thrill of the hunt. The end is in sight. All that remains is to gather the players once more and to reveal the truth, and for that we must wait for Mrs. Keeling to regain her voice. When she does, she will give us not the final answer, but the final piece of proof I require. Until then, he said, settling into a chair with an air of supreme patience, we wait. The trap is set. The truth is ready. Now we allow the killer the illusion of safety. It will make the final confrontation all the more satisfying. Section 9. Mrs. Rosalind Keeling regained consciousness late the following afternoon. Her awakening was not a sudden return, but a slow, pained surfacing. Dr. Quayle, still maintaining his clinical role, examined her and reported she was lucid but weak, suffering from a severe concussion and profound shock. She remembered nothing of the attack in the conservatory, she claimed. The events of that night were a blank. Poirot received this news with a polite nod. He did not press to see her. Instead, he busied himself with a series of discreet, final inquiries. He sent a trusted police sergeant to verify certain financial records. He had a quiet word with the head gardener about the shed's inventory. He made a telephone call to a prominent jeweler in Bond Street. Each piece of information, when it returned, was met with a small, satisfied hum. By the evening, he was ready. He instructed Superintendent Holloway to gather everyone in the drawing room at 9 o'clock sharp. All of them, he insisted, including Mrs. Keeling. She may be an invalid, but she must be present. It is essential. The drawing room, scene of the first death, now felt like a stage awaiting its final act. The empty wing-back chair had been removed, leaving a palpable void. Poirot had arranged the seating with theatrical care. Felicity and Professor Finch on a settee, Dr. Quayle in a straight-backed chair near the hearth, and Mrs. Keeling wrapped in a shawl and supported by cushions on a chaise longue. Riggs was notably absent, still in custody. Holloway stood by the door, a solid official presence. Poirot himself stood before the fireplace, his back to the mantelpiece, his hands clasped. He waited until the clock finished chiming the hour, the last note hanging in the hushed room. "Mesdames et messieurs, chai," he began, his voice calm and clear. "I have asked you here tonight to bring this sad and tangled affair to a close. A woman has died, a theft has occurred, an assault has taken place. The police have arrested a man. But the heart of the matter, the truth, remains obscured by a fog of lies, half-truths, and clever misdirection." He paused, letting his gaze rest on each face in turn. Felicity's anxious defiance, Finch's nervous agitation, Quayle's stony impassivity, Keeling's wan fragility. "We shall begin with what we know to be true. Lady Genevieve Marchmont died of a sudden cardiac arrest. That is the medical fact. But what precipitated it? That is the question. The police initially believed it was the stress of a robbery, but that theory relied on the theft of the Artemisia comb occurring after her death. This, I have deduced, is impossible. He held up a finger. Reason the first. Monsieur Riggs, a most observant man, stated the comb was placed securely in her ladyship's hair in such a way that its removal would be a deliberate, two-handed act, disturbing her coiffure. No such disturbance was noted. Reason the second. The comb, when found, was meticulously clean. No strands of her distinctive silver hair were caught in its clasp. Therefore, it was cleaned after being removed. A panicking thief does not clean his spoil. A person planting evidence does. Professor Finch cleared his throat. Then, when was it taken? It was taken, Professor, before she died. Very shortly before. I believe Lady Marchmont discovered its loss in this very room. She felt for it, found it gone, and knew in that instant it could only have been taken by one of you. The shock of that betrayal, the personal, intimate violation, was the catalyst for her fatal collapse. Her smile was one of bitter, ironic recognition. You, she said. Not in surprise, but in confirmation. A collective intake of breath hissed through the room. But that means, Felicity whispered, horrified, the murderer didn't stab or shoot her. They upset her to death. A psychological murder, Poirot agreed. Elegant, brutal, and for the killer, seemingly risk-free. For who can be convicted of causing a heart attack? Dr. Quayle shifted in his seat. A fanciful theory, Poirot. Without proof, it's merely a story. Proof comes in many forms, Doctor. Let us examine the motive. Why steal the comb at that moment? Not for its value. That would be sheer madness with 4 witnesses. No, it was stolen to prevent something, to remove an object, from Lady Marchmont's possession before a particular event could occur. Poirot turned to Felicity. Mademoiselle, your aunt's will. You said she told you the Artemisia was to be yours. Did she ever speak of altering that bequest? Felicity frowned, thinking. She threatened to, once. During a row about my bohemian friends. She said if I wasn't careful, she'd leave the Artemisia to the British Museum, where it would be appreciated. I thought she was just being nasty. A threat she may have repeated to others. To someone for whom the comb passing to the museum, or even to you, would be a disaster. Poirot's eyes swept the room. Because the comb was not merely a jewel, it was a key. He walked to a side table where 2 objects lay covered with a cloth. He removed the cloth, revealing the Artemisia comb and the brass horticultural sprayer. These 2 objects seem unrelated. One is priceless, beautiful. The other is common, ugly. Yet they are connected by the same hand. He pointed to the sprayer. This was found in Mrs. Keeling's hand. It contains carbolic acid, a vicious weapon. But why choose it? Why not a knife from the kitchen or a heavy ornament? Because it was to hand. Because it was already in the mind of the person who fetched it. Someone familiar with its use, not for gardening, but for another purpose. He looked directly at Dr. Quayle. Disinfection, Doctor. In a medical context, perhaps. A strong solution for sterilizing instruments. Quayle's face was rigid. A common household disinfectant. Anyone might use it. But not everyone would have fine, parallel scratches on the brass, exactly matching the width and pattern of the metal clasp on a leather-bound medical ledger. Poirot gestured to the ledger, which Holloway now held. This ledger was carried by you, Doctor. Frequently. It was found, after the murder, in this house, and you were desperate to retrieve it. It contains a secret, not just notes on your patient's nerves, but a record of your own financial nerves. Lady Marchmont was your creditor. You owed her a great deal of money. Money you could not repay. He let the accusation hang. Quayle said nothing, his jaw clenched. But the theft of the comb, Poirot continued, turning to address them all again. Let us return to that. If the doctor needed money, why steal the comb he could never sell? But what if he did not intend to steal it permanently? What if he intended only to borrow it? This was a new idea. They stared at him, baffled. A pawn, Poirot said. A temporary pawn, to cover an immediate, pressing debt to a less patient creditor than Lady Marchmont. He planned, I suspect, to replace it before she noticed, perhaps after extracting funds from her on another pretext. But his plan went awry. She noticed its absence too soon. She looked at him, the one person she had trusted with her health and her wealth, and she understood. The shock killed her. Now, he was not just a debtor, but a murderer, with the stolen comb burning a hole in his pocket. He moved to stand before Mrs. Keeling, who shrank back into her cushions. And now we come to you, madame. You were more than a patient. You were a witness to the doctor's financial dependence. You may have even been his accomplice in securing loans from your generous friend. You knew about the comb. You knew his desperation. And after the murder, you saw an opportunity, or perhaps you were seized by a terrible fear. Her eyes were wide, fixed on him. I don't know what you mean. The attack in the conservatory, Poirot said softly. You went there to meet someone. You took the sprayer, not as a weapon, but as a prop. To stage an attempt on your own life, to make yourself appear a victim, and to frame someone else, likely Professor Finch, whose grey wool you had procured from a torn suit jacket, perhaps during a consoling embrace. You scratched the sprayer with a clasp from a book you'd taken from the doctor's bag to strengthen the link to him. You smeared it with your own hand cream. You then created a loud disturbance and struck yourself a carefully controlled blow to stun yourself. A desperate, dramatic bid to redirect suspicion and to silence any suspicions about your own role in the events surrounding the murder. That's preposterous, Quayle exploded, standing up. She was injured. She was concussed by her own hand, Poirot stated coldly. The evidence was too neat. The wool fragment, the conveniently held sprayer, the lack of a true assailant. It was a performance. But like all performances based on lies, it contained a fatal flaw. He turned to Holloway. Superintendent, the report from the jeweler, if you please. Holloway read from a notepad. We showed the Artemisia comb to Mr. Leverton of Leverton & Sons. He confirmed its authenticity. He also stated that he had cleaned and checked the setting for Lady Marchmont just 3 days before her death. At that time, he noted the central emerald was secure, but one of the small platinum leaves on the stem was slightly loose. He advised repair. He provided a sketch of which specific leaf. Poirot picked up the comb. A loose leaf, a tiny defect. He held it up to the light, then walked slowly to Dr. Quayle. When you borrowed the comb, Doctor, in those frantic seconds after dinner, did you notice the loose leaf? Did you, perhaps, fear it might detach and be lost, adding ruin to your disaster? Is that why? He reached out with his free hand. You did this. With a swift, gentle motion, he plucked a single, tiny platinum leaf, no larger than a baby's fingernail, from the lapel of Dr. Quayle's jacket, where it had been clinging, nearly invisible. The room froze. You see, Poirot said, holding the minute leaf between his thumb and forefinger for all to see. When the comb was cleaned so meticulously after the death, this one, loose piece, must have come away. It stuck to the cloth, or to the killer's clothing. It was overlooked, a microscopic witness. And it has been with you, Doctor, ever since. A souvenir of your crime. Jonathan Quayle stared at the sliver of platinum, his clinical facade crumbling into dust. His shoulders sagged. The fight drained from him. And you, Mrs. Keeling, Poirot said not unkindly, your performance was for him, was it not? To protect him or to bind him to you in shared guilt. But you only succeeded in revealing the depth of your own desperation. He stepped back, encompassing them all with his gaze. So, there it is. Dr. Quayle, for financial ruin and murder, Mrs. Keeling for conspiracy and obstruction. The psychological murder, the staged theft, the fake attack, all laid bare. He gave a small, decisive nod to Superintendent Holloway. The spell was broken. The final gathering was over. The truth, at last, had been served. Section 10. The silence that followed Poirot's demonstration was absolute, broken only by the sharp, ragged intake of breath from Dr. Jonathan Quayle. He did not look at the platinum leaf in Poirot's hand. His eyes were fixed on some middle distance, seeing not the elegant drawing-room, but the abyss that had just opened at his feet. The clinical detachment he had worn like armor was gone, stripped away to reveal the terrified, cornered man beneath. "A loose leaf," he whispered, the words a dry rustle. "A damned loose leaf." It was as good as a confession. Superintendent Holloway stepped forward, his earlier uncertainty replaced by grim purpose. "Jonathan Quayle, I am arresting you for the murder of Lady Genevieve Marchmont. You do not have to say anything, but anything you do say may be given in evidence." Quayle did not resist as Holloway took his arm. He seemed almost relieved, the terrible tension of the past days dissolving into the cold clarity of disaster. His eyes flickered to Mrs. Keeling, who had buried her face in her hands, her body shaking with silent sobs. There was no solace there. "It was never meant to be murder," Quayle said, his voice suddenly clear, addressed to the room, to Poirot, to the ghost in the empty chair. "I only needed the money, a temporary loan against the comb. My other creditors were not as patient as Genevieve. I planned to replace it within the week before she ever wore it again. I slipped it from her hair after dinner when I went to fetch her a tonic, just a moment unseen in the shadow of the cabinet." He gave a hollow, mirthless laugh. "I am a man of precision. I thought I could execute it with precision." "But she noticed," Poirot said, not as a question but as a solemn statement. "She felt for it, a habit when she was thinking. Her hand went up, and it was gone. She looked at me, just me. She knew I'd been near, and she smiled, that awful, understanding smile. She said, 'You,' and then she was gone." He closed his eyes. The shock. I knew her history of anxiety. I'd written of it myself. I never dreamed. I never intended. "The road to hell, Doctor," Poirot said quietly, "is paved with unintended consequences, and with stolen combs." As Quayle was led away, Poirot turned his attention to the weeping woman on the chaise. "Madame Keeling, your turn." She looked up, her beautiful face ravaged by tears and guilt. "I didn't know he would kill her. I only knew he was in trouble. He confided in me. We were close. After she died, I was terrified. I thought he'd done it deliberately. And then when the comb was found on Riggs, I thought we were safe. But you wouldn't stop." Her voice rose in a wail of frustration. "You and your little gray cells. I had to do something. I thought if I was attacked, it would look like the killer was still here, that Riggs was innocent, that we were all in danger. I thought they'd call off the hunt. I took the sprayer from the shed because I'd seen Jonathan use a similar one for sterilizing. The ledger, I took it from his bag, scratched the sprayer. I tore the wool from an old jacket of the professor's he'd left in the cloakroom weeks ago. I planned it all, but I hit myself too hard." She touched her bandaged temple with trembling fingers. "I'm a fool." "You are a woman driven by fear and a misplaced loyalty," Poirot corrected, not without pity. "You will answer for the assault on yourself as a waste of police time and for conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. But you did not take a life. That is a significant difference." Professor Finch had risen to his feet, his face a mixture of outrage and vindication. "The wool was from my jacket. By Jove! To think I was almost framed. This is monstrous." "Indeed, Professor," Poirot said, "but your own motives were not pure. Your eagerness to see the case closed, your anxiety over your funding, it made you look suspicious. Greed, even for a noble cause, can cloud judgment. Felicity Marchmont had not moved. She watched as Mrs. Keeling was escorted from the room by a policewoman, her own face a mask of stunned sorrow. All of it? For money? For a loan? She looked at Poirot, her eyes brimming. Aunt Genevieve would have given him the money if he'd asked. She was stern, but she was never cruel. "That, mademoiselle, is the final tragic irony," Poirot said. The murderer did not understand the heart of his victim. He saw only a creditor, a figure of judgment. He did not see the friend, however demanding, who might have shown mercy. It was a failure of imagination and of humanity. With the arrests made, the machinery of justice began to turn. Jonathan Quayle, in a subsequent, more detailed statement, confessed fully. The Artemisia comb was restored to Felicity. Riggs was released from custody with profound apologies from the yard, his dignity intact, though his faith in the order of things was forever shaken. He returned to the Marchmont house, a silent, solemn figure, to help his young mistress set it to rights. A week later, Poirot received a visit from Superintendent Holloway at Whitehaven Mansions. The fire crackled, the furniture was symmetrically arranged, and the air smelled of coffee and order. "A clean conclusion, Poirot," Holloway said, accepting a small, perfect cup. "Quayle will hang. Mrs. Keeling will get a few years, likely suspended given the circumstances and her health. The comb is back where it belongs. You've done it again."